Hello world, it is the PG.Biz podcast. I'm your host, Peggy and Salz. Brian, well, he's away. He's preparing for Scottish Games Week, which is a massively cool event. You'll hear a lot about it soon. Me, well, I'm hanging out in my garden because, hey, it's a wonderful, glorious September day, Indian summer. I hope it's the same for you, that you're having also a great time after the last days of summer. And speaking of a great time, we've got that for you as well, because we have part 2 of our series with Lexi Sydow. She is Data Diva at data.ai. Part 2, well, part 1, we gave you everything you needed to know about the data around how to monetize your app, ad formats that work, and some other surprises this time around. Other surprises as well, because we're going to be talking about what it takes to make a successful game. There is a formula. There is an MPS. Make a note of that. And you can learn it all and listen to it all in the episode coming up right now. So take it away.
I'm going to kick off with the other part of the report. So the report was very, very focused on data, some great insights that we heard before, but interestingly, and I think perhaps even uniquely, Lexi, you've looked at games that have defined the market, have defined the first half of 2023. First of all, am I correct that that is something quite unique? Because it certainly caught my eye when I was looking at it, how you were illustrating how games succeed.
Absolutely. I mean, this report we've been doing in partnership with IDC, I believe, for about 10 years. And this was the first time that we sort of decided to give a spotlight to some of these key games. We had a lot of questions about coming into a year of sort of economic uncertainty, headwinds with gaming. We just came off of our first year where we saw a slight decline in gaming. The opportunities for ad spend, we actually saw mobile ad spend hit $336 billion last year, compared to mobile app store spend, which is about $167 billion. So you can see there's a massive opportunity for mobile ad spend. And the growth rates were still up around 7.5% year on year. That's one of the areas that we were looking at this year, is in this climate where we saw disposable income and gaming spend essentially move together. So people said, they wanted to know, well, who's succeeding right now then? So we felt it was really important to call this out. And we used a metric that we call the mobile performance score, which is a sort of proprietary metric from data.ai. And that was one of the ways that we helped to determine which games sort of made it in, was those that were in that sort of top 10% or the 90th percentile for this score.
We have NPS, now we have MPS, which is pretty cool, mobile performance score. There are 3 components of it, what I saw. Interestingly, sentiment, at a time when most of the game devs we're speaking with are like, hey, I want to have a brand. I want people to understand and recognize this game. And that means the brand, and that would have to mean brand love. So that goes back, I think, to sentiment again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what we've done with our mobile performance score is we've sort of made a composite metric to try to give a bit of kind of like a credit score, for instance. This is your health of your app. And it's a great way that you can look at sort of the holistic number and then unpack each part. So there's acquisition, engagement, sentiment, and monetization. And so you can kind of see where your strong suits are, where you might be lacking. And sentiment is a key part of that. And that tends to be the thing that we see a lot of apps and games will struggle with, that sentiment piece of keeping users happy. Now, some of that is your brand. Some of it could be directly related to an update where maybe it didn't go as planned, or it could be a bit of, feeling upset about not getting to a level. But a lot of that is really good information for you as a publisher to leverage. And it also shows you a bit of how, as you mentioned, your brand love. How are you doing? Are you able to carve out that affinity with a core gamer and keep that over time? So this metric is looking at not just your recent level, but how that relates to sort of your cumulative as well.
Lexi, it's incredible what you guys are doing, and again, your use of data. I think again, to go back to the very beginning, you're bringing it to life, and it strikes a chord with me because one of the things that the PocketGamer.biz team do on an annual basis is come up with their top 50 developers. It's a fairly convoluted process, and there's a lot of editorial judgment. And yes, we dive into the data, but we're trying to kind of bring together what you've now clarified as sentiment in a very clear and easily definable data-driven way. So we may come knocking on your door in 2024. But let's have a look at the games, because I think that's why a lot of our listeners are here. So let's drill into things. So starting off with Monopoly Go from Scopely. I mean, what did they do to get such high marks in your book? I mean, 99, that's a tough one to beat.
I mean, I think part of it is, they launched in April of this year, so they gained some initial really strong traction right off the bat with some great user acquisition campaigns. We noticed they had about a 50-50 paid organic split, so heavily leaned on paid to drive downloads for this year. And interestingly, paid search on iOS was really key to their strategy. About 65% of their iOS paid downloads came from paid search ads. And I think that's really key because that's that high intent traffic. If you're searching on the app stores, you are in that mindset typically to find and download an app or game. And so having a robust strategy there would have been key. The other part that, almost goes without saying is just the IP of Monopoly. So having that sort of beloved IP that people know, that's a theme we've seen as well, where they're benefiting from this game. This is a little bit of that cross-platform play too, right? In a different way. We've got a board game in a sense, not quite cross-platform play in the sense that you'll play both, but a board game that sort of moved to mobile. So I think that's another sort of interesting experience here where the mobile market was hungry for Monopoly, I think, to kind of make its debut. And they've also layered in a lot of other elements that I think were quite innovative, that sort of takes that classic board game, but then redefines it for that sort of mobile first experience of particularly social features like playing with your family and friends, and then having sort of frequent touch points to engage, like mini games and offers and events. And then there's also this sort of evolving worldscape they have as well. So you can continue to kind of edit and define that in the gameplay. So I think that's quite interesting because that's what we've seen a lot of games that are immersive and leverage that creativity and user-generated content can create really deep engagement there. So, I mean, boiling it down, I think they've had a lot of really strong mobile first tactics in terms of user acquisition and in layering in the gameplay that would elevate just the board game, the classic kind of functionality, and give it more of that rich, immersive mobile experience that I think people have come to kind of expect with the mobile game as well. So they've upped the ante there.
It's interesting when you drill down into that. I'm just thinking literally, they nailed it. They wrote the book on it. And I wasn't aware that the search ads played such a big role here as well. So that tells us again, not just who made it, but how they made it.
I think paid search is a really interesting one. And it also offers a lot of those ways to break into that branded search traffic. So when you have like a branded keyword, you can actually bid on that keyword, whereas you can't, stuff your competitor's branded keyword necessarily into your keyword bank. So it's a great way to try to garner some of that traffic and to kind of make inroads, because we do see the bulk of keyword searches are branded at the top end of the, generating the most search volume on the app stores. They tend to be branded terms like Facebook or Monopoly or Instagram. So the more you can play in that sector, I think the more competitive it can become, and you can start to see some interesting things happen with shifts around that.
So let's move on in the games and come down to an NPS of 96, because that's what we saw with FIFA Soccer. And we talked before in the last episode about just overall simulation, sports simulation, how that was a very, very strong genre in itself. And this is a global success story, right? 964 million in consumer spend. That's just eye-watering for some devs indeed. But what made it the breakout success that it was?
This one's really interesting. I do love the questions we get from folks around when we came out of COVID. Oh, are we, did we stay essentially glued to our phones, or did we break away from it? Were we doing things? Were we out and about? And I think we like to think we all just were so social. But the reality was we continued playing our games. We continued staying on our phones. And what was really interesting is that intersection of where our demand went. So real life games and live sporting events became a really important part of, I think, consumer demand globally. We saw that with Barbie and Barbenheimer with movie ticketing apps. We saw downloads skyrocket. We saw with Taylor Swift tickets that Ticket Tech and Ticketmaster as apps saw surges in downloads from demand to get access to live events. And FIFA Soccer, this particular game, benefited from the real life sporting tournament. So 2022 FIFA World Cup taking place in Qatar. There was a very clear indication of some of the final games where we saw boosts in downloads of this app. So people were really hungry to be watching real life games. And yes, we were out and about, we were engaging, but we were also downloading FIFA Soccer and playing that while we were watching maybe live on our TVs. So it was pretty interesting to see. They did see in 2018 a boost for downloads from the World Cup, but they hadn't seen quite as strong of a boost as what they saw in 2022, where we saw 135% growth there in downloads. And it was a huge boost for them on the whole. And then sort of lifetime downloads wise, we saw sort of a 34% jump from where we were in 2021. And that strong boost upward in 2022 with adding this huge influx for user acquisition. So I think for FIFA, they benefit from being also a beloved cross-platform game. I know there were some issues in the past with playing, truly cross-platform with mobile, but it is a cross-platform title that people love. So I think that IP is strong. The relevance for the World Cup is there. And we saw some really strong boosts there in engagement and then in that consumer spend. I think also having premium players that you can build your sort of dream soccer team and having those exclusive leagues and content and events, all really important. So those sort of timely events and the exclusive leagues that you can join are also key to help drive that monetization. And as of this recording, they have passed the $1 billion lifetime milestone. So they are definitely doing something very right with that.
Absolutely.
A new member of the $1 billion club. Fantastic.
Yep, and that's just mobile. It's very impressive.
So I want to skip to our old friends that we've talked about a couple of times, Royal Match, because again, that came in with a mobile performance score of 95. Is there anything you can add to about how they've approached this in terms of, because it's not a new title. So what is it they're doing that's really elevated them up into this fairly strong position?
One of the key things, and this is similar to FIFA Soccer, is that the game is available in over 174 markets. So they've gone very global, so captured a very wide footprint. We do see, strong, I think I had mentioned before, the US is the biggest driver of revenue in the first half of this year. So you do see some skews with where revenue sits, but huge global base. So that's a big factor there. When you do that, you've got access to some of the high growth markets for downloads as well. So focusing on Brazil and India and Turkey, for instance. The other thing I think that's notable here is around sort of their user acquisition. We did see coming into 2023 and in the first part of the year, we did see some heavy paid user acquisition campaigns for paid ads to drive usage. And what we saw was actually that those paid off in growing revenue. So I believe they were really strategic in leveraging user acquisition to kind of probably re-engage, to me, that says lapsed users or potentially people who maybe had forgotten or hadn't played in a little while, and sort of re-engage them strategically into the game. So those I think are core. And I think the other thing that's really quite useful and quite a draw card is the sort of the storyline. So they've created this match game that has, you're helping to solve something, you're helping to find, and there's this sort of storyline that carries you through. And that's something that we saw with Merge Mansions when they did really well with some of their viral ad campaigns with celebrities, and they created this sort of storyline that also people kind of buy into and get involved and have that emotional buy-in. So I think that that's something over time that they've done very well as leverage that storyline to help continue to drive that gameplay in something like a match game where you don't historically tend to see that type of a storyline emerge.
It certainly seems to be something that they're doing very well. I started out way back when in the games industry as a writer, and being able to take something as simple as a match 3 mechanic and build that sort of meta-narrative around it, with recognizable characters who, flow out into the UA campaign and everything. Whatever your opinion of the game, they are out there, they are doing this, and it seems as though it's a very well-deserved position for them, just based on taking something so simple and, again, maximizing what they're doing with it based upon the data.
And on to your point, Brian, is, storyline, narrative is really important. This is what we're seeing amongst these top ranking games. Localization, maybe even cultural localization, depending. 174 countries, that's quite a spread. That's casting a very wide net. So there are things that these games are doing to be top ranking games. What did you see, Lexi, in the way of consistencies or commonalities that emerged that's like, yes, successful games do this?
Yes. I think you've touched on some key ones. So having that wide net, the large footprint globally, and carefully localizing. So culturally localizing, not just translating, and activating where you can in market. So we've seen that in some other titles as well. So Free Fire has done a great job of activating local streamers and DJs and putting characters into games in Brazil and India when they were going after launching in those specific markets. I think fresh new content is key. Content is a big one. So whatever that might be, whether it's a time-based event or game, or for instance, a partnership for a key area. So Stumble Guys has done a really great job as well, leveraging, Barbie and Nerf and Hot Wheels and partnerships with NFL to drive just that kind of fresh content into their experience. I think the social element is pretty key. We saw that was a big part of what catalyzed a lot of behavior during the early days of COVID, and what people sort of latched onto a bit more was the social element of gaming. And so that player versus player and having the ability to play some of these games in a more social arena, whether it's with your friends or just with other folks on the internet. Events is the other one. I think that's a real, a similar thing, whether it's an in-game event that you're hosting, or for instance, like in the case of FIFA, if you're optimizing for something real life, where you've got this real life event happening and you're leveraging sort of what's paying out with different players and teams and the jerseys and supporting the actual tournament and trying to incorporate that in the app or the game itself is important. I think events are key for marketing as well, for helping to drive user acquisition and be relevant at the time. And then the last thing I'd say is around sort of those immersive experiences. And so building and customizing and creating, that's a key part of our mobile experience. I think TikTok did a really great job of sort of unlocking that for a lot of folks and having that be kind of the bar that most things need to have, like a layer of creativity and user generated content to them. So in the example of Monopoly Go, having that be a part of the evolution of that classic kind of gameplay with your traditional board game, I think is really key to the mobile experience, because that's what we see. Roblox is the number one most played game on mobile, and that's a direct indication of how much people enjoy building and creating and having that kind of immersive experience.
Peggy asked about commonalities. I was going to ask about a blueprint, but from everything you're saying, it almost sounds as though the only blueprint for developers, creators out there is don't ignore the data. Use the data that's there and tailor your experience. There's no one size fits all approach anymore. Is that fair to say?
I think that's very fair to say. And I think that the data can really point you in a direction and illustrate where there is markets that might be underserved as well. How, people thought the match three or the match market was pretty stable and had it locked down. And we see over the last few years, someone roll in and you'd expect there to be a high cross app usage between Candy Crush and Royal Match. But in reality, it's only about 10%. So you're accessing this new pool of users. So I think following the data is key, and looking at where there's patterns in the data that might be counterintuitive, and looking beyond gaming, looking at non-gaming trends to see how you can tap into some of that consumer behavior that would translate into gaming as well.
Yes, it's about the data. It's about understanding the audience, which I can do through the data as well. But there's something you touched upon in the key takeaways that just really caught my eye, because I thought, this is something we need to look for. A new kind of gamer is what you're telling us. There's going to be a new kind of gamer. What kind of gamer is that?
I think this is one where it's sort of all encompassing. I think the new gamer is a hard one to define, because we have young and we have older, we have on the go, we have people playing on their iPads at home a lot more. So it's not truly on the go. We've got in markets like the US and the UK, over half, 6 or 7 of the top games that regenerate the most revenue, those skew more female, meaning we've got larger, likelihood of use by women, which challenges perceptions about what, gaming tends to be young and male. In the US, one of the fastest growing segments of gamers was actually those aged 45 plus. Gen Z was still the biggest section, but the fastest growing was actually this older demographic. And I think that that's exactly what it is. I think really the new gamer is it's very broad, and there's lots of inclusive opportunities. And I think that that's a really great thing that mobile has done. And then a great example is just even how people find games. There's a great game called Dumb Ways to Die. It's a hyper casual puzzle game that actually, I remember it started as a Metro Trains safety poster campaign in the Melbourne train and trams. And there were posters just being like, don't be dumb, and like on your phone and walk over the line, things like that. And it was in Melbourne 10 years ago, maybe. And that game, Dumb Ways to Die, is the number 2 game in the US for hyper casual puzzle in H1. And it's just gained this traction. And part of that was due to trending on TikTok. So it just started to organically trend on TikTok and videos of the gameplay. And it got this sort of massive boost of popularity in the US, which was not the intended target market of the ad campaign 10 years ago. So that type of new gamer, right? People are finding games from all over and all different types of games. So there is that really core gamer that is playing on mobile. And then there's also still this really large pool of hyper casual people who are playing just for short gameplay and a little bit of the entertainment. And I think that's, I guess, the last point around new gamer in my mind is people often think gaming, okay, entertainment, it's discretionary. And I think we've moved beyond that with gaming. I think so much of gaming, there's an emotional tie, there's storyline, there's characters that you're rooting for. There's also that social element that is really key. And friend groups that are socializing in this capacity within the game, as well as maybe playing the game and being on Discord. So I think that it's so much more than entertainment, and it's so much more than the young male gamer we tend to still think of sometimes. So I think this new gamer is challenging because it's not easy to pinpoint, but it's exciting because it's really broad and brings a lot of people into the fun and the glory of games.
And it's a big market. It's actually very positive what you're saying, because what you're saying is like, hey, it's mainstream. It's everybody. We're all gamers.
Exactly.
I think that's exactly it. It's way, way, way back in the mist of time when I started. Gamers looked like me. It was other young, predominantly white males, and there were certain types of experience. But you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head, because now you might as well say mobile phone owner, because as we found over, lockdown in 2020-21, every phone owner is a gamer. My parents swear blind that they are not gamers. My mum still asks if I'm ever going to get a real job, but she's playing about 15 games of Words with Friends simultaneously and beating me in most of them. So, she's not a gamer, but she games. And I think we're getting to the point where it's now just so ubiquitous. It's like saying readers or viewers or listeners. There will always be the die-hard music fans, but it's so ubiquitous now that we're just at the point where I think the industry is playing catch up. And the fact that so many of these emerging markets are mobile first is helping that diversity. So it is a brave new world.
That's why we're here, Brian. This is exciting. We're on the cusp.
We are at the forefront, the cutting edge, Peggy, as always. Hence, the nomination for the award. But Lexi, I think we're going to have to call a halt. We could keep going for the rest of the day, just on this one report alone, but I think we're going to have to call a halt and just sort of invite you back. But before we do anything else, please tell everybody in the audience where they can find the report, where they can download it.
Yes. So you can go to data.ai/insights. It will be on that blog. And the specific link is data.ai/go/gaming report IDC 2023. So that's a mouthful, but you can get it at data.ai/insights.
Perfect. And we'll provide links in the show notes and make sure that people can find you wherever they're coming across the podcast. Before you go, we have two questions that we ask all of our guests. The first is, so given your insight, phenomenal insight into the games market, what is it that you're playing right now? And secondly, what's your favourite game of all time ever?
Oh, so hard. As much as I like games, I feel like a liability because I'm very bad at a lot of them. So I'm actually playing Stumble Guys, but not playing it very well. I find it very fun, but I'm not going to tell anyone who I am. I have a soft spot for Subway Surfers because I think that was one of the very first games I ever played on my phone. Another one that I remember was one of my first was, I think, called Cut the Rope. And I believe it was... Do you remember that one? I think it was a paid game, and it was back when Starbucks gave you app download little cards that you could get the free. And it was the first time I got that a long time ago. But I think one of my favorite games is still Among Us. I do love Among Us. That was a big pandemic favorite for me as well with friends and family. So I think there's a bit of sentimentality around being able to play with family, even though I was in Australia and my family was in the US. So Among Us has a special place for me as well.
Brilliant. And very informed decisions with very high sentiment ratings all round, I would say.
Exactly. Very high MPS there, I think. Indeed. Well, Lexi, it has been such a wonderful show, 2 shows actually, with you, filled with data, because all of those numbers, all of that analysis, and you're looking at us. So you're not like, tacked up with your notes and you're reading your report. No, this all came from your mind. And that's what impresses me the most. In your DNA. It's in your DNA.
We
alphabet soup, but with numbers up there.
Oh, yeah. No, this is great. It's when I was talking to people and the rest of the team and saying that we're going to have 2 episodes on data. There were a few rolled eyeballs and a few people going, what? How are you going to make that work? But it has been genuinely fascinating, completely fascinating. Some huge insights for everyone to take away from that. So we can't thank you enough. And I'm going to say it again, we would love to have you back on at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
Would love to do it again. Thank you guys so much.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.